Part 2 about my shitty ex-boyfriend. So like I said, the original plan was for us to go together to his house after school. But I was like, I'm gonna be spending the whole week over there. I should probably pack some clothes and get a shower. So after school, he drove me to my house. And he said that his parents wanted to have dinner together, so he had to go back to his house. And he would pick me up later. So when I got to my house, I got ready and everything, blah, blah, blah. And by this time, it was like 8 o'clock. Well, I kept texting and calling him, asking him where he's at, if he's coming to get me still. Then I realized that none of my text messages were going through. So then I go to text him on Snap. And what do you know? I couldn't find him on there. And then I call him off my mom's phone. He answers the phone and hangs up right away. Well, we were supposed to have a little party at his house too, that all of my friends were going to. So I texted every single one of them. None of them answered the phone. And I remembered that my one friend had shared her location with me before. So I went and looked at her location and where was she at? My boyfriend's house. So while I sat at home crying that whole week, he was throwing parties and cheating on me with my friends. And when we went back to school, he acted like we were never in a relationship.
So Lexi and I are swimming and we're like halfway through the swim on the backside of the rock. And while we're swimming, something hits me on the back. It literally felt like someone punched me underwater. And I screamed and Lexi's like, what happened? But I was freaked out and I didn't explain it to her, so I just told her to swim to the rock, get out of the ocean, and get on top of it. Once we were safe on the rock, I told Lexi what had happened and she was super freaked out, and I actually had a red mark on my back, so she knew I wasn't making any of it up. We stayed on the rock staring at the water, trying to spot anything moving for like 30 minutes. But after a while, we were like, okay, well, we have to swim back at some point, so we decided to swim in. We literally swam as fast as we could back to the shore. When we got to the shore, there was an old woman on the beach looking at us kind of weirdly. She's like, where's your other friend? And we were confused. We were like, what? She's like, you had a third girl swimming with you, didn't you? And we were like, no, it's just us. And she's like, well, I definitely saw a third girl out there with you guys. But then, a few days later, the local newspaper came out with a story titled Something in the Water. People at another beach a few miles away claimed that they were getting hit by So Lexi and I are swimming and we're like halfway through the swim on the backside of the rock. And while we're swimming, something hits me on the back. It literally felt like someone punched me underwater. And I screamed and Lexi's like, what happened? But I was freaked out and I didn't explain it to her, so I just told her to swim to the rock, get out of the ocean, and get on top of it. Once we were safe on the rock, I told Lexi what had happened and she was super freaked out, and I actually had a red mark on my back, so she knew I wasn't making any of it up. We stayed on the rock staring at the water, trying to spot anything moving for like 30 minutes. But after a while, we were like, okay, well, we have to swim back at some point, so we decided to swim in. We literally swam as fast as we could back to the shore. When we got to the shore, there was an old woman on the beach looking at us kind of weirdly. She's like, where's your other friend? And we were confused. We were like, what? She's like, you had a third girl swimming with you, didn't you? And we were like, no, it's just us. And she's like, well, I definitely saw a third girl out there with you guys. But then, a few days later, the local newspaper came out with a story titled Something in the Water. People at another beach a few miles away claimed that they were getting hit by
After talking to the bus driver, my mom came back looking terrified, but she didn't say anything about it and told me to finish getting ready for school. At the time, I didn't know what happened, but my mom would end up telling me a few years later. When she went to the second bus, she found out it was being driven by my regular driver and it was full of other kids that were usually on my route. By the way, the other bus was empty. My mom asked the driver about the substitute driver and about him calling in sick. He tells her that he never called in sick and there is no substitute driver on his route. The driver immediately called dispatch in a panic and told her to go inside and call the police and report this incident, which she did without me knowing at the time. There was absolutely no one doing my driver's route that day. Whoever this was most likely a kidnapper who had targeted me. I never heard anything about it again, not even if someone else had ended up being picked up by this mysterious fake bus driver. But chances are, had I gotten on that bus, I would never have made it to school or back home. And if we hadn't overslept on that specific day, I would have been on that bus. Part 2 why you should be careful working in food delivery. This man was tall, wore glasses, and was balding. He was also fully functional from what I could tell. In this moment, I realized how badly I had messed up. I was cornered away from the doorway. He thanked me for taking off his order. I slightly wanted to welcome and try to step around to the window. He took a step in the same direction as the reception moved and asked me what I wanted to do. My heart was pounding at my chest, and I could do it more than I had wanted to go back and say I had to go. However, he didn't move. Somehow, I mustered up enough courage to step towards him and say, I really have to go. His hand was on my door, and I knew he would put it down and let me go or try to attack me. He stared at me for a moment,
Part 2 to a cop searching my car without my permission. So I see this police officer opening up my car door and putting his head inside my car. So I'm like, "Excuse me, officer, is there an issue? Why are you searching my car?" And he was like, "Oh, like, this is your car?" And I was like, "Yes, do you have a warrant?" And then he said, "Do you live here?" And I was like, "No, but do you have a warrant?" And then he said, "No, actually, the neighbor called me because he was concerned, and I actually live down the street, and the car was unfamiliar, so I felt the need to search it. I can't see inside of your car because of the tint, so I didn't know if somebody was in there, like maybe sleeping in their car or something." I don't really remember what he said, but I was like, "Okay, but I think you need a warrant to search the car. Please close my door." And honestly, he was pretty nice about it, I'm not gonna lie. I was just really annoyed because in my head I'm thinking like, why? Like, I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm always getting caught up for doing nothing.
Extremely toxic best friend part 2. So pretty much her excuse for that was, oh well, he said that he was gonna leak my nudes if I didn't send him them again. Which was a lie because literally half the school already had her nudes. So then I started talking to this other boy, and he lived like right down the street from her. So she was like, "If you want to go to his house, you can." And I was like, "Are you sure?" And she said, "Yeah, just go tell my mom." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So I went and told her mom where I was going and went over his house. So I walked back to her house and she literally locked me out. Like her mom had to come open the door for me to let me in. And she was like, "Oh, it's a good thing you came back when you did, because I was going to drive you home now and tell your dad everything that you did." And she goes, "I don't think you guys should be together because you're unexperienced." And she would always tell me how he flirts with her all the time. So after our friendship ended, she goes, "I just felt like it was always a competition between me."
So I was having a sleepover at Lucy's house, and I woke up in the middle of the night to someone or something tickling my feet. I scream, and then I hear shuffling. Lucy wakes up, and she's like, "What's wrong?" And I tell her that something was tickling my feet, but she doesn't believe me. I'm like, "Well, why is the door open? We shut it before we went to sleep." And she goes, "Relax. Sometimes it happens because there's a draft in the house." And I tell her that I think it was her uncle who was tickling my feet, and she goes, "Oh, come on, you're hallucinating." And honestly, at the time, I had a bad feeling about Lucy's reaction. It felt like she was gaslighting me, and I had no idea why. A few weekends later, Lucy and I are chilling at the mall on a Saturday afternoon. My parents let us go to the mall together alone, but their one rule is that we have to stay together the whole time. They call it the buddy system. So that day, Lucy's acting weird. She keeps looking around nervously and checking her phone. She says she has to go to the bathroom, and I'm like, "Okay, I'll go with you," because we always go together even if the other person didn't have to pee. And Lucy's like, "No, I'll go alone. I'll be quick." And I'm like, "No, I'll just go with you." And she snaps really aggressively, and she's like, "Just stay here." And then she spins around and sprints.
Has anyone ever told you not to do something and that just made you want to do it more? Once, 3 girls went into a video rental store to find a horror movie to watch. They came across an old tape, but the woman at the store told them they weren't allowed to watch it. After one girl stole the tape, they decided to watch it together, but what they would see would terrify them. They pressed play. Suddenly, the room went into darkness, with only the TV on. On screen, they saw a woman tied to a wooden stake. She was surrounded by an angry crowd carrying torches, until one man walked towards the woman and set the wood beneath her feet on fire. The woman began laughing, and as the flames reached her face, she screamed that all who witnessed her death would suffer the same fate in 2 days. Then the tape cut off. The girls were scared, but eventually convinced themselves it was a prank. They decided to return the tape, but when they went back to the store, they found that it was gone. It was just an abandoned building. 2 days later, all 3 girls were found scattered across the city, their bodies burned beyond recognition. When the police investigated the strange coincidence, they found nothing around the girls had been touched by flames at all, except the trash can outside of one of their homes. Everything inside had been turned to ash, except for one mysterious videotape, which was left untouched.
This is part 2 of my true scary childhood story about the little boy in the tornado shelter. After I saw the little boy, I got so scared and ran up the stairs to tell my parents. When they went down there to see what I was talking about, the little boy was just gone. It was almost like he had vanished into thin air. My mom then told me to never go down there again. But of course I didn't listen to her, and I went down there the very next day. The moment I went down there, I saw the little boy again. He looked super sweet and really scared, so I decided to just try to talk to him. I asked him what his name was, and he said his name was Adam. Then I asked him why he was down there, and he said he lived down there. And then, being the curious child I was, I asked him where his parents were, and his reply was they were dead. I then asked him if he wanted to come eat dinner with us, and he said he couldn't leave. I was so confused. I asked him why he was down there, and then he just went silent. Like this video if you want a part 3.
Part 2 of how my whole entire online class found out that I was pregnant and one of them told my mom. To continue with the story, I texted a couple of them back and I was like, how did you know? And they were like, we heard you sobbing in the background screaming, I'm pregnant, I'm pregnant. Then one of them goes, we heard some guy in the background screaming, just get a hanger, and you were screaming, no! Then one of them comes to tell me that the teacher had to start a brand new class because I wouldn't mute myself. So then I emailed my teacher and I told her that I was going through a really hard time and I really do apologize. And then she explained to me that everything was fine, like she understands, things happen. So we were all good until like 3 days later. And my mom calls me telling me that somebody in my class had told her that I am pregnant. And I tried telling her like, no, like that is not true whatsoever. And then she sends me a recording that somebody